On this vote, the yeas are 52, the nays are 43, and one senator responded present. 3/5 of the senators duly chosen and sworn not having voted in the affirmative, the motion is not agreed to.
Mr. President,
Senator from Illinois.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate resume legislative session and proceed to a period of morning business until 6 p.m., with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
President.
Senator from Nebraska.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor this afternoon during World Trade Week to urge President Obama to submit the pending free trade agreements Korea, Panama, and Colombia. I hope that this is the last time that I come to the floor on this issue until we are actually debating these job-creating agreements. But I must admit, I feel like I'm holding my breath. 1,420 days have passed since the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement was signed. 1,422 days have passed since we signed an agreement with Panama. And it has been 1,640 days since we completed negotiations with our close ally, Colombia. Now, we have heard the administration tout the job-creating benefits of the agreements, so why more roadblocks? Our unemployment rate, Mr. President, is nearly 10%. Our workers deserve a consistent message on job creation from this administration. It has been over a month since President Obama and the President of Colombia made an announcement. The announcement was that negotiations had been completed, I might add, yet again. I was relieved that President Obama finally announced that there was an agreement and that there was a need to complete the long overdue agreements. I am confident that the agreements brought to the Senate and the House would finally win bipartisan support, and I still am today. In fact, over a month ago in the Wall Street Journal, my colleagues, Senator Baucus and Kerry, called for Congress to, quote, restore a broadly shared bipartisan consensus on trade, unquote. Now the administration seems to be moving the goalposts, suggesting continued delay. They're trying to hold these agreements up to force us to make spending increases that were contained in the ill-fated economic stimulus bill. During the challenging economic times that our nation has endured, we should all be doing all we can to exert every single ounce of energy to get our economy moving again and create jobs. This is not done by heavy-handed government, massive new spending, and new entitlements when our current programs are unsustainable. It is accomplished by lowering and removing barriers to our job creators so they can flourish. Korea, Panama, and Colombia all have much higher tariffs to our exports than we have to their imports. These three bipartisan votes should have been near the top of the agenda 2 years ago. By now, we should be voting on new agreements that this administration has negotiated, not the leftovers from the previous administration. And we'll need an even greater focus on leveling the playing field through trade agreements if we're really going to double our exports in the next 5 years, which is the goal the President has set. Yet the administration, claiming that reopening negotiations with Korea, Colombia, and Panama was necessary, continued to talk through these agreements. Now, I'm not saying every single agreement before us, or hopefully before us, is perfect. No agreement ever is. However, let's not forget that these agreements were originally negotiated in good faith between allies. What does this delay do to our reputation as a reliable negotiating partner? Back where I come from in Nebraska, a lot of business is still done with a handshake. We trust our neighbors because they're good people with good values. But if you make a deal with someone and you shake on the deal and then keep changing the terms or delaying the follow-through, well, you tend to stop dealing with those people. I sure hope that doesn't happen to us. The fastest growing opportunities for American businesses, farms, and ranches are outside of our borders. Our greatest opportunities are overseas in rapidly developing countries. I fear that these long delays have hurt our ability, the ability of our government to negotiate high-quality trade agreements. But most importantly, Mr. President, it has hurt the ability of Americans to compete in these growing marketplaces. And let's not pretend that this delay has not cost American workers. Since the Colombia Agreement was initially signed all those days ago, our businesses and our agricultural producers have paid nearly $3.5 billion in tariffs for goods exported. That's enormous, especially when you consider that the U.S. International Trade Commission estimates that an American job is supported by every $166,000 in exports. Instead of wasting money on tariff payments, the U.S. manufacturing and ag sectors could have spent billions of dollars creating jobs here at home. I hope that we can soon get past the continued delays and the administration can signal to us that they're serious about doubling exports in 5 years. On July 1, less than 2 months away from now, the trade agreement between the European Union and South Korea goes into effect. It's also the date that the FTA between Canada and Colombia goes into effect. The negotiators for other countries are watching the United States, and they have seen a lack of trade policy. They have seen a change here. They're doing everything they can to fill that vacuum with negotiated and approved agreements. Now our exporters will face even greater competition when our trade agreements are approved, and hopefully they will be. The President said it very well in his State of the Union address. Quote, "If America sits on the sidelines while other nations sign trade agreements, we will lose the chance to create jobs on our shores," unquote. And that's exactly what's happening. I'll give one example. In 2007, American wheat farmers supplied Colombia with almost 70% of the wheat market, even though they faced tariffs of 10 to 35%. By 2010, our wheat farmers' share of the market had dropped to 46%. Where did that business go? Well, meanwhile, Canada's share grew from 24 to 33%. That percentage will skyrocket when Canadian farmers can export their products duty-free on July 1. Our wheat farmers may effectively be shut out of a market that they dominated at one point in time. Americans who are out of work know firsthand that an opportunity is being missed. Nebraska farmers, businesses, workers, those across the country know that we can compete with anyone, given a level playing field. After the absence of leadership on trade in Washington during the last 2 years, though, the job of competing is harder and harder. In proclaiming this week as World Trade Week, the President noted the connection between the global economy and prosperity in our own country. He said, "To ensure our success, a robust, forward-looking trade agenda that emphasizes exports and domestic job growth, unquote, must be put in place. It is disappointing that the positive steps forward we've seen over the past few months have slowed in recent days, and we just can't afford more setbacks. I look forward to working with the administration over the next 2 years on forward-looking trade efforts. Real progress forward would produce great opportunity here in our country. But we've got to get this work done first. And therefore, it is my hope that the President will bring to us, without delay, the Korea, Panama, and Colombia trade agreements for us to vote yes. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President.
Senator from Ohio.
Mr. President, I am asking the consent to vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciated the words for the junior senator from Nebraska about these trade agreements, and I take him at face value. I know that he means well. I know that he believes that these trade agreements help the American people. I also know that every time there's a major trade agreement in front of this Congress, and the presiding officer's first one, I believe, is my first one in front of Congress, was something called the North American Free Trade Agreement, and they promised and promised and promised, saying there would be all kinds of creation of jobs, our trade surplus would grow. It would mean not just more jobs, but better paying jobs. Well, it didn't quite work out that way with NAFTA. Then they did the same kind of promise and overpromise with PNTR, Permanent Normal Trade Relations with China. We went from we had a small trade with Mexico, and with NAFTA, we had a trade surplus with Mexico not too many years before NAFTA was signed, and it turned into a multi-billion-dollar trade deficit. With China, we had a small trade deficit. A deficit in trade simply means that we buy more from that country than we sell to that country. President Bush the first said that a billion-dollar trade surplus or deficit turns into, he had different estimates, but between 13,000 and 19,000 jobs is what he used to say. Whether that's precise or not is a bit beside the point, but the point is that if you're selling a lot more than you're buying, it's going to create jobs in your country. If you're buying a lot more than you're selling, you're going to lose manufacturing jobs. Well, when we went into the literally hundreds of billions of dollars of trade deficit with China after PNTR, and all you got to do is look at go into any store almost in the country and see the number of products that are made in China that used to be made in Vermont or Ohio or Michigan or Pennsylvania or Mississippi or wherever. And so, Mr. President, we know that these trade agreements, that every time they come to the floor, the promise is this is going to create jobs for Americans. They did it with NAFTA. They did it with PNTR with China. They did it with the Central American Free Trade Agreement. Now they're saying the same thing with South Korea and Panama and Colombia, that it's going to create American jobs. Well, it just doesn't ever, I mean, maybe the theory's good. I don't think the theory's very good, but maybe the theory's good, but it just doesn't seem to work out that way. So I just urge my colleagues, listen to what supporters of these trade agreements say, to be sure, but, trust but verify, and really ask the tough questions about why is this going to create more jobs. We know the cost of South Korea trade agreements, literally $7 billion. It's going to cost us a lot of money. They're not paying for it. These fiscal conservatives here, they don't want to take away the subsidies from the oil industry. They also aren't even going to pay for this trade agreement. It's going to cost us $7 billion, plus the lost jobs it's created, the lost jobs that come about from this. And we know what these lost jobs, we know what it means to Mansfield, Ohio. We know what it means to Sandusky and Chillicothe and Cleveland and Dayton. Proud cities with a proud middle class that have seen these manufacturing jobs so often go straight to Mexico, go straight to China, go straight to countries all over the world after we sign these trade agreements, or after we change these rules about trade. So, at a minimum, Mr. President, I've asked the President of the United States by letter about 35 or so senators have signed this letter. We'll release the letter. We'll send the letter to the President tomorrow, underscoring the President's commitment, the United States Trade Representative, Ambassador Kirk, and the President's economic advisor, Gene Sperling, who said that they will not send these 3 trade agreements to the Congress until the President's had an opportunity to sign trade adjustment assistance. Trade adjustment assistance simply says that when you lose your job because of a trade agreement, that you at least are eligible for assistance for job retraining. I mean, to me, the problem is the trade agreements, and that's costing us jobs. But at a minimum, and the great majority of Democratic senators here understand with the President that we don't pass these trade agreements without helping these workers that are going to lose their jobs. To me, it's a little bit of a counterintuitive. Well, why pass these trade agreements at all if we expect job loss to come from them? But the other side will argue that jobs will increase overall, even though they always promise that, and it doesn't seem to work that way. But everybody acknowledges that some people are going to lose jobs as we do these trade agreements. That's a bit of sort of circular thinking that I don't particularly buy. But at a minimum, as I said, Mr. President, because so often when these trade agreements pass, conservative Republican sort of pro-corporate interest senators will say, well, we want to take care of these workers and let's pass a trade agreement. Then they just don't get around to taking care of the workers. That's why we've got to do trade adjustment assistance first, why we need to begin to enforce these trade rules. We saw in Ohio alone in the last 3 or 4 years, because we enforced some trade rules, because the President of the United States, President Obama, and the Commerce Department and the International Trade Commission stood up and enforced trade rules on China's gaming the system on tires, on oil country tubular steel, and less so, but on coated paper. We've seen jobs in the United States come back because we're leveling the playing field so they can't game the system as much. That's why it's important that we take care of workers before these trade agreements come to the Congress, and we'll debate the trade agreements. I hope we can defeat them. I think it's going to be hard. And we make sure we do the enforcement of these trade rules that are now in existence, that are now part of the law, before we get that in place and strengthen that before we pass these bills, these trade agreements. So, Mr. President, it's a pretty simple thing to do, but it's important. And one of the trade agreements that the senator from Nebraska mentioned, he was talking about the Colombia trade agreement. I could talk on each of the 3 and to the point of perhaps boring some of my colleagues, but on the one trade agreement that's particularly egregious with the country of Colombia, just last year 50 trade unionists, 50 labor activists in Colombia were murdered, 50 murders. And they're saying, the supporters of this trade agreement says, yeah, but they're getting better in Colombia, and fewer trade union activists are getting murdered, so really it's getting better. Well, not that long ago, a labor rights lawyer was shot, did not die, is surviving, was injured badly. But there's just something a bit untoward about saying to this country, because you're getting better and fewer trade unionists are getting murdered, that we ought to give them free trade. We ought to do a free trade agreement. I hope that we'll stand back. If we really care about justice, if we really care about human rights, if we really care about the values that we embody of democracy and fair play, we shouldn't be passing a trade agreement with a country where the labor environment is such that these labor union activists who believe in collective bargaining and free associations. Collective bargaining, like the consensus we have in this country around collective bargaining, at least we did until some radicals in Ohio and Wisconsin tried to write legislation and pass legislation that unwinds some of that, that's helped create a middle class. But if we believe in collective bargaining, we believe in free association, we believe in the right of people to voluntarily organize and then bargain collectively, we shouldn't be passing a trade agreement with a country that has an environment where so many labor activists have been murdered. Mr. President, I just want to remind my colleagues again how important these trade adjustment assistance is before we pass these trade agreements. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President. Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today to voice my concerns about a great deal of controversy surrounding a complaint issued under the National Labor Relations Act against the Boeing Company. Boeing recently decided to open a new plant in South Carolina. The National Labor Relations Board's acting General Counsel, Leif Solomon, issued a complaint because of evidence that this decision was made in retaliation for recent strikes at the Boeing plant in the Puget Sound area. Now, I hope there is no dispute about a couple of points. First, Boeing is a highly reputable company that produces great products, valued around the world, and great jobs. Not just jobs, but good jobs. And there should be no doubt also about the importance of public debate, robust criticism of government agencies, including the National Labor Relations Board, when it makes decisions that spark disagreement. And I have the greatest of respect for my colleagues on both sides of the aisle who may have been critical of NLRB decisions in the past and of this action in the present. And there should be no doubt also about the importance of the integrity of the NLRB process, which begins with a complaint, which is all we have here, against Boeing, and then has a procedure for consideration by an administrative law judge of the facts and the law, then to the full board of the NLRB, and a right of appeal to the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. Here, in this instance, there have been a series of attacks on the complaint and the acting general counsel that involve apparent efforts to impede or derail that process and to prejudge and even preempt that process. The effect is to politicize and potentially stop what should be a legal proceeding handled under the appropriate rules and laws and statutes by an independent government agency. This issue is about the integrity of the process. At this point, there is only a complaint against Boeing. This complaint was issued on the basis of statements and documents and actions by the company itself. There is certainly evidence, including at least one Boeing executive's statements, that the company may have retaliated against workers. The NLRB and the acting counsel have not only the right, but the responsibility to investigate and act where the facts and the law establish a right and obligation to do so. So no one should be trying to prejudge this case before it goes before the administrative judge, and no one should be seeking a pass from the appropriate process, and no one should be seeking to intimidate or to interfere with this lawful proceeding. I come to the floor today because of the prospect of exactly that danger occurring here. On May 12th, Chairman Darrell Issa, representing the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, sent a letter to the acting general counsel of the NLRB requesting that it produce virtually all internal documents relating to this case. Indeed, the letter has a number of specific paragraphs that are sweeping in their scope, requesting, for example, demanding that all documents and communications referring or relating to the Office of General Counsel's investigation of Boeing, including but not limited to all communications between the Office of General Counsel and the National Labor Relations Board. The House Committee, with all due respect, is not a court. It is not the administrative judge. It is not a proper party to be demanding these documents in the course of a lawful judicial proceeding. And the chairman's attempt to insert the committee into this case by conducting its own round of discovery at this point would interfere with the NLRB's ability to prepare and present its case before a real judicial officer. These actions, and some others, are an attack on the integrity of the NLRB, an attack on its ability to make decisions and enforce the law as the United States Congress has instructed it and required it to do, based on decisions involving the facts and the law alone. The NLRB is part of our judicial system, part of our justice system, and it should be given the opportunity to do justice in this instance. It should be given the opportunity to protect fairness and peace at the workplace, which is ultimately its mandate and its very solemn responsibility, its tradition, and its mandate from the Congress is to protect jobs and foster economic growth by maintaining peace and fairness at the workplace. And these priorities should be shared by all of the country. I certainly believe and hope that the people of Connecticut want fairness and peace in the workplace, as we do in our workplaces. The NLRB, very simply, should be given that opportunity to do justice here without improper or inappropriate interference by members of the United States Congress or anyone else. And my hope is that it will be vindicated and that the attacks will cease and that it will be given the opportunity to go forward lawfully and appropriately and properly. Thank you, Mr. President. And I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. We are.
All right. Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to speak for 10 minutes or maybe even less on an issue that's very important to not just my state, but really important to the country, and that is we know that this flooding is going on around the country. This is a picture from Arkansas, and clearly there are people all over the country or all over the south along the Mississippi River that are underwater. You can see the very end here, this little end is a lawnmower that's sticking up out of the water. The water's coming up to the bottom of the windowsill in this home over in East Arkansas. So we certainly send our prayers and any sort of assistance we can to people in my state, in Louisiana, Mississippi, other places, Missouri. Obviously in Missouri they've had lots of water up there, and Tennessee, other places that are really underwater right now. What I want to talk about today, though, Madam President, is not this flood that the country is experiencing right now, but a flood in my state that happened 3 years ago. We had a situation 3 years ago where we had some flooding on the White River near a town called Mountain Home, and FEMA paid out some money to the flood victims there. Turns out some of that money was paid out wrongly. I want to talk about that here in just a minute. But let me start with June 1, 1865. In the President Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, he described our government as a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And I like President Lincoln's description of our government, and I firmly believe that our government was created by our citizens to protect our citizens. It's there for the benefit of our citizens, and that's what I want to talk about today. Many of you have heard me talk about FEMA's disaster assistance recoupment process, which, by the way, I am 100% for recoupment. Our federal agencies make mistakes and they send out things in error. There's some double dipping, there's some lack of oversight, there's poor systems in place from time to time, there's some fraud, some dishonesty out there, and I think the taxpayers, we owe it to the taxpayers. The federal government owes it to the taxpayers to go out and recoup as much money of that as possible. And I want to focus on one sliver of that, and even within that sliver, a very, very small piece of that small sliver, and that is FEMA's disaster assistance recoupment process. I have a bill on this subject, and since the last time that I've spoken about this on the floor, we've taken our bill, we've been in the Homeland Security Committee, it has been reworked and modified. Our staff and many other staffs on the committee worked on this late last week and over the weekend and early this week, and I think they spent over an hour with FEMA on the telephone to make sure they understand all of FEMA's processes and how this really works. But the bottom line is, yesterday in Homeland Security, I was able to offer my new substitute bill, which was adopted in the committee. The substitute was adopted. The amendment was adopted to the bill. So we now have a new bill in terms of the text of the bill. The changes were negotiated. Again, we spent a lot of time talking to staffs and members from both sides of the aisle, both sides of the committee. And basically what it does is very simple, and it's much simpler than what we were doing a week ago on this. It's very simple. What our bill does is it gives the FEMA administrator the authority to waive disaster assistance recoupment efforts if three conditions are met. You have to meet all three conditions. First, the disaster assistance must have been distributed based solely on a FEMA error. So there can be no fault on the part of the person, but solely on a FEMA error. Second, There cannot be any fraud or any misrepresentation on the part of the debtor. And third, the collection of the debt would be against equity and good conscience. And the reason we chose that phrase, equity and good conscience, is not because we made it up, but because that's a standard that's in current law. The Department of Defense uses that language when they talk about recoupment. The Social Security Administration uses that language. But also OPM has that language in their law as well. So this is not setting a precedent. This is basically applying other standards, recognized standards in the federal government to FEMA. The reason this is important is FEMA technically has discretion right now, but FEMA can't tell us the statistics because they don't keep the statistics. But basically what we hear over and over and over from FEMA and other folks that are familiar with this process is that they cannot, or they are very reluctant to waive these debts. They feel like they have a mandate to go recoup this money and collect this money, and that's what they do. And quite frankly, in some circumstances, what they'll do is they force someone to go through this appeal process. They'll make a determination that maybe that person may have $100 a month in disposable income, and they'll basically take that $100 a month from that person every month for, say, 5 years. In the case in Arkansas I want to talk about here in just a moment, the people supposedly owe back, according to FEMA, owe back $27,000. And so if they did that and they took all their disposable income, and let's just say it's $100, we don't know what it is because we don't know all the facts. They're in the process of going through the process, but we don't know all the facts. I'm not trying to get in their personal financial information, but the bottom line is, let's say it's $100 a month of the disposable income. These folks are on Social Security, so you know it's not going to be a whole lot more than that, if that. But for 5 years, FEMA takes all their disposable income, and at the end of 5 years, FEMA has collected $6,000 on a $27,000 debt. I mean, are we really getting what we want out of this? Are we trying to squeeze blood out of a turnip here? And I've been working on this legislation for 2 months. All we're trying to do is give FEMA, clearly in the statute, give FEMA some discretion to let them make decisions, again, when equity and good conscience would dictate that there ought to be a waiver. And it's not that hard. And I know that right now in the Congress, and this is a good thing, I know right now in the Congress, people are very money conscious, and that's good. We're pinching pennies. That's good. We're trying to recover every federal dollar we can. That's good. And I know the President, the presiding officer right now, has been leading the charge on that, and that's good. And we applaud her, and we're cheering for her to continue to do that. We want her to do that. We want that for the government. But one of the things that our government should do in dealing with its citizens, they should consider the equity, and they should consider doing things in good conscience. And in this situation, I want to talk about the situation here in Arkansas. I want to talk about one family who's received one of these letters from FEMA. There's not very many. We don't know the exact number, but we know there's not very many that will fall under this statute that we're trying to address. But in this one family, they're in their 70s, they're on Social Security, they bought this home or built this home, I'm not sure which, years and years ago on the White River near Mountain View. When they purchased the home, they bought flood insurance. They knew they were on a river. They knew it might flood. It's a river, for crying out loud. It's in Arkansas. It rains a lot from time to time. They knew it might flood. So they bought flood insurance. Well, after so many years, the flood insurance company said, we're not going to do any more flood insurance. We're not even offering that line anymore. They went to Lloyd's of London and they bought flood insurance. They went overseas to buy flood insurance so they'd have protection. They carried that for a number of years. Finally, Lloyd's of London said, we're not doing flood insurance anymore. So then they tried to buy flood insurance through the National Flood Insurance Program. They could not do that because the county where they reside had not passed an ordinance that FEMA had approved. Now, don't know why they hadn't gotten into the merits of that, but the bottom line is FEMA knew that this county did not pass this ordinance. They knew it. They had to know it because FEMA keeps it all by zip code. They keep it all by county. They keep it all by flood zone map. They knew this. Nonetheless, they show up at her house a day or two after the disaster. They take photos. They give her the paperwork. They assure this couple, they assure them that they're entitled to this money. And they walk them through the process. The people did it, got $27,000 from FEMA and this individual assistance money. Those people took every dime of it and put it back in their home. Every dime, put it back in their home. They played by the rules from the very beginning to the very end. Then, 3 years later, FEMA writes them a letter and says, oh, by the way, we made a mistake. We should never give you that money in the first place because your county hadn't passed this ordinance. So you owe us $27,000 back. You have 30 days to pay it back, or you're going to face penalties and interest. Well, again, this couple is in their 70s. They're on Social Security. They don't have much else. They have their home. That's about it. And this could ruin them financially. Probably will ruin them financially. I don't know how in the world they would ever pay this, anywhere close to the $27,000. But nonetheless, FEMA says, look, our hands are tied. We have to pursue this. We have to squeeze everything we can get out of these folks. And my view is that this was completely FEMA's mistake. And that's why I opened with the quote, we're supposed to be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. This doesn't sound like FEMA's acting like that type of government right now. FEMA has caused these people harm. Our government should never harm its own people. Should never harm its own people, but that's exactly what they've done here. Because of FEMA's incompetence back 3 years ago, they are harming these people. These people 3 years ago, had they known that they were not eligible, had they known that they shouldn't apply for this, had they known FEMA shouldn't have given them this money, they would have taken a different course. They would have made decisions based on the circumstances they had at the time. Now, they're having to go back. Who knows if they can ever pay this money back? Who knows if they could ever borrow any money? Who knows how this is going to work out? But I just feel like that if we gave FEMA the discretion in this particular case, you'd see a different result. You'd see FEMA say, okay, we'll waive this entirely, and we're just not going to pursue you because it was all our fault. And I think FEMA clearly needs to have that discretion in the statute. Again, if you look at their regs, look at some of their law, look at their practices, they do technically on paper have this discretion, but apparently they're very reluctant to use it, and their Inspector General is really pressuring them to collect every dime they can. So FEMA feels like their hands are tied. And Madam President, let me say just a couple more words about this. I have asked the Homeland Security Committee to allow us to reconsider this in the committee. There was a little bit of an odd circumstance in the committee yesterday. We had the votes, but some of the senators who were there and for this either had to leave or that were on the way when we voted, and we ended up not having enough to pass it. If everyone was there, we would have passed this. Now what we're asking is to reconsider that we'd be allowed to bring this back up and put it back up on the next markup, which I think is going to be next week. We would like to do that. We think it's a matter of fairness. And the reason I'm asking this and I'm so insistent on this is because this is not limited to my state. I'm not trying to just help a few people in the state of Arkansas. I think that there are very few in number here in my state, but what's happening around the country is, I saw it today. There were two stories, I believe one was from Tennessee, one was from Mississippi. Same thing is happening in those states. People are starting to get these letters from FEMA, and what's going to happen is all of my colleagues, they're going to start coming to the Homeland Security Committee and they're going to say, do something about this. We have these hardship cases in our states that need to be addressed. And trust me on this, this is going to happen for most people in this chamber in their home states because FEMA has a backlog of 165,000 of these cases. They've only gone through a little over 5,000 of them to send these back and process these and send these letters out. So they have 165,000. They've done about 5,000. They have 160,000 of these to go. You can bet your bottom dollar that most senators in this chamber will have people in their home states that need a little equity, need a little grace, and need to have their government stop beating up on them. Again, I feel very strongly that in this particular case, FEMA has done these people harm. They've put them in a very dangerous position financially. They gave them some money. Now they're trying to jerk the rug out from under them and take the money back. And I just think that's unfair. And I think that once these cases, and there won't be many of them. There may just be a couple hundred around this country. I don't know how many there'll be, but there'll be a few hundred probably around the country. I think that once people get into these cases, they're going to want FEMA to clearly have this discretion. And the first numbers we ran, it was only about 0.3%, but now probably it may be a little higher than that, but we don't know because FEMA doesn't keep accurate statistics. One last thing on FEMA. I feel like FEMA has fixed this for the present time and going forward. I feel like when Director Fugate came in, this is one of the many cleanups he had to do from the previous FEMA administration. I think they've done that. I think they have better systems in place. I think that their competence level has gone up in the last couple of years. I think generally he's doing a pretty good job. I don't agree with him on every single thing, but I think he's done a pretty good job. And, you know, we've had him in the committee and we've asked pointed questions before, but I know he's trying. He took over an agency that was in great distress. And I think generally he's done a good job, and I think he's fixed this. At least he thinks he has, and as far as I know, he has. I think they much more have their act together now than they did back then. So my point is that hopefully you will not see these kind of cases come from the flooding that we're seeing right now. These are really legacy cases from the previous FEMA administration. So I'd like to thank my colleagues for being aware of this. I'd like to ask my colleagues on the Homeland Security to allow us to bring this back up, put this back on the markup. Let's get it out of the committee. You know, one of the great things about Homeland Security is very, very seldom do we have party line votes in that committee. We do sometimes, but very seldom. That committee is very nonpartisan. In fact, the chairman and ranking member insists on that. And when we sit in that committee, we actually sit around the table, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican. It's a great committee to serve on. I love being on that committee, and I just hope that my colleagues on the committee and also in the chamber will encourage us to move this through the committee next week and try to get this done to help a lot of people around the country. Madam President, with that, I yield the floor, and I